Hey everyone, it's Motsi. We are now in the final stretch of our Hainai official recaps. We are now in Act 3, and though it's gone a bit longer than maybe all of us anticipated, it's been super fun to revisit these episodes, and I'm starting to understand why a bunch of you keep re-listening to episodes, because this has been awesome, actually. Just like Act 2, we'll be dividing Act 3 so far into 2 parts, but they will be released very close to each other, so you won't have to wait long at all. With these recaps and our upcoming original episodes, we will be releasing a whopping 7 episodes of Hainai this June, and we hope you've been enjoying the show. We hope that you continue enjoying the show, and thank you so much for your support. Happy Pride and Happy Filipino Heritage Month this June in Canada, and please enjoy the recap for Act 3 so far. The first bit. Act 3 opens with Mikey's Tale, a Hainai short story, where you learn of a quiet and bookish 14-year-old boy in the 90s named Mikey, who lived with his nan and was in love with his best friend, a confident boy named Carl, with whom he explored the streets of Toronto. On one of their excursions, Carl finds a delicate cameo of a woman, and seems strangely enamored with it. A kindly-looking young man in a fine suit approaches them, asking to buy it off of Carl, but he refuses, which Mikey finds strange. One night, Sergeant Dooley, who specializes in unusual cases for Toronto police, meets a young teen who survived a fire and was talking crazy. It's Mikey, who tells Dooley to look up when they investigate the smoldering remains. He and one other firefighter find a horrific sight: the impossible, burnt corpse of another boy, seeming to reach down from the ceiling. Dooley takes notes, and Mrs. J, the journalist from Elaine's account, and his ability to deal with the supernatural better than he. Dooley later interviews Mikey, promising to believe everything he says, and Mikey tells him everything. Later in life, Mikey has nightmares of his experience, of Carl bringing him to an abandoned house, trapping him in a nightmare and attempting to fuse them together, skin to skin, surrounded by blood crawling like bugs. They were only separated when Carl and the house were set aflame, and Mikey himself remembers being carried out of the burning house by a man singing Billy Boy gently in his ear. Episode 28, The St. Patrick's Case, Part 1, takes place before the events of Act 2 Halloween finale Undas. A religious man named Michael speaks of meeting his god, after the god pulled him from a fire when he was a child. In the background, someone whimpers in fear as Michael kills them, and the recording ends. In the next scene, Donna records a report about a serial killer who's been active for years, who leaves his victims' bodies in churches in Toronto, branded with a stylized S and ash lining the inside of their throats. The most recent incident had a corpse left in St. Patrick's Cathedral, and was dubbed the St. Patrick's Case. He's briefly interrupted by the friendly officer Zhao, who offers to get him dinner. The scene ends with Donner getting a call from Mary. In another call, Donner and Murphy invite Mary to the precinct to help them with a serial killer case, if only to sense memories from objects related to the case. Donner records Mary's findings, and Mary observes his habit of recording things on tapes. Zhao enters once again, offering dinner, and when she departs, Mary teases Donner that she's into him. Murphy returns to the two exchanging friendly jabs, both verbal and physical. Mary then shares her observations about the case, that she doesn't sense elder magic, but senses a distinct memory of singed hair, a fire, an old house, and a mirror. Mikey's memories from the previous episode. In the next call, Mary's just finished learning how to shoot a gun from Donner, who worries about her safety outside of her magic. In the following scene, in a recorded monologue far in the future, Richard Henry, the benefactor's right-hand man, speaks of a Michael who was pulled from the fire by an elder, who told Michael his true name. Michael became obsessed with the elder who saved his life, and found traces of him in a journalist's book, and in belongings that elder abandoned long ago. With incomplete knowledge, Michael attempts to gain power so that he could save himself and his loved ones, but all he ends up doing is killing people and wasting their deaths. Richard Henry shares something the benefactor once told him, that he once rescued a boy named Michael from a fire before a focus fully devoured him. Richard Henry believes that this is the same boy who grew up to be the serial killer, Michael. But he is wrong. In the final scene, Mary records a video from within a beautiful cathedral for her nanay when she runs into Zhao. Zhao asks her about the department, which deals with strange supernatural cases and only includes Donner and Murphy. Mary then notices Zhao's burn scar over her hand, confirming she once survived a fire. Mary feels a sudden unease as they part, telling Zhao to stay safe. Episode 27, Clara's Tale, is introduced by other Mary at the Dreamlike Jazz Club, revealing to whomever she's speaking to that she is a kakambal, or twin soul, to the Mary in the waking world. She's Mary's sleeping self, and references Mary's nickname in the Philippines, Chichay, shortened to Chay, as well as her real name, Marilag. Other Mary recounts Chai's experiences in Toronto, from saving Laura to meeting the detectives and eventually, Ashvin. She speaks of the elders, the benefactor, the puppet master, and eventually, Halloween night, where Chai, Mary, was unable to save 5 people, including Abe, her friend, who died under her watch. The one other Mary is speaking to is then revealed to be Donner, sharing the responsibility that Mary seemed to take on alone. Other Mary asks Donner to remember this dream, even if she knows he won't. She speaks of other powerful beings in the world which, like elders, gain power from proximity to death, but are more dangerous than any elder. Other Mary talks of a third thing that should not be there, residing in the space where only she and her twin soul, Chai, the Mary of the waking world, should be. Other Mary is afraid, because Maddie should have never been exposed to this much death in Canada, which is why her nanay sent her there in the first place. Other Maddie warns Donner of what will happen when she eventually... But she's cut off before she can finish. In an interview, a man named Nathan talks about his childhood neighbors who died in a massive fire. He remembers spending time with the 2 siblings, the younger girl named Clara, named after the girl in the Nutcracker ballet. He isn't able to remember the older boy, briefly calling him Billy. He noted that the parents didn't seem all there, so neglectful that the young Billy would clean up around the messy house full of old food empty alcohol bottles and cigarettes, his adult nature and knowledge appealing to Nathan. Billy was also intensely protective of his little sister, to the point of possible violence, explained by him being her guardian angel, an idea that seemed to come from their parents, who were also deeply religious. One day, the family went on a trip, and days after their return, Nathan snuck over to the house and found Billy in the dining room with his parents. The house was surprisingly clean, and the parents shockingly doting and alert. They fed the boys delicious food, and Nathan didn't notice that he never saw their faces, or that the kitchen seemed untouched, despite all of the homemade food. And he continued not to notice anything unusual, until he asked where Clara was. And Billy looked like he wanted to kill him. When the parents finally looked at him, Billy grabbed Nathan's wrist to keep him from screaming. They had no eyes, with swollen, blood-red insectile things crawling out of them. Billy acted normal, claiming Clara wasn't feeling well, while Nathan realized all the food they had eaten was covered in red bug things and made of moldy, forgotten food, alcohol bottles, and cigarettes, similar to how the neglectful parents usually kept their living room. In his retelling, Nathan suddenly remembers that Billy's name was actually Michael, like the archangel, and that he used to call him Mikey. This fact seems to disturb Donner, but he asks him to continue. Nathan describes how Mikey had Clara hidden in a trunk in their room, feeding her food that Nathan brought, as he told Nathan how it all began. On their trip, they stopped by an antique store where Clara gave Mikey an old cufflink with an S, which his parents took from him. The next day, the house was spotless, and they acted like perfect parents, feeding him a feast, before Mikey realized what they'd fed him, and he hid Clara away. They planned for Nathan to get her out, since the parents seemed to want both children, but Mikey chose to stay behind and distract them. Clara desperately wanted Mikey to come with them, but he refused. Nathan and Clara escaped through the basement window, but Clara wanted to go back for Mikey. Nathan said no, but when he turned around, Clara was gone. He didn't go back for her, instead returning home, exhausted. When he next woke up, the house was in flames. At the end of his retelling, Nathan seeks reassurance from Donner that he isn't crazy, and Donner tells him that it was all real. Nathan laughs, then breaks down sobbing. The recording ends. Episode 28, The St. Patrick's Case, Part 2, takes place after the events of Act 2 Halloween finale Undas. Donner attempts to call Mary multiple times, but it always goes to default voicemail. The next call has Laura confirming to Donner that Mary sometimes opens the door for her, but Laura insists Donner needs to talk to her. Donner's reluctant. He doesn't want to put her through something traumatic again, especially not so soon after Halloween. Still, Laura insists that Mary shouldn't be alone. In the next call, gone to Donner's voicemail, Officer Zhao is following a lead on the St. Patrick's case, reinvestigating the St. Patrick's Cathedral in the dead of night, when she's knocked out by someone while on the call. Another message on Mary's default voicemail comes from Ashvin, who knows Mary's blaming herself for something that's not her fault. relating to her guilt, with his guilt, about watching George May kill someone in front of him, unable to do anything about it, during the month that he was possessed. He relates to Mary on many levels, and reminds her how she helped him navigate the discovery of his magical abilities, asking her to call back, saying he's worried about her. They all are. The last call is between Donner and Murphy in an emergency situation, learning Zhao has been kidnapped by the murderer, having theorized he was targeting people who'd survived fires as children, with Zhao fitting that exact description. In a separate call, Murphy calls Mary behind Donner's back, begging for her to help them save Zhao. Finally, in the latest call, Mary is heard from for the first time, calling her Nanay and begging her for forgiveness, not knowing what to do. All spoken in Bisaya, her Nanay's native tongue, which she rarely uses in place of Tagalog, her Tatay's native tongue. In Tagalog, she then asks Anagolay, the Tagalog goddess of lost things, for guidance, and gets up before ending the call. In the next scene, on a phone recording, Mary's walking around in an echoing place, a cathedral, speaking to someone she can't see but can feel, saying she can smell the blood on him, the death on him, making her skin crawl. She mentions she can also feel the fire, which prompts Michael to reveal himself, pointing his gun at her and taking her phone. The next phone recording has Mary struggling with being bound, with Zhao being shocked that she still has it, knowing Michael took her phone. Mary reveals it's her second phone, which she uses for work, hiding it but keeping the recording function on. Zhao berates her for coming to save her alone because she didn't want anyone else to get hurt, pointing out that Michael isn't a ghost or a ghoul, but a man with a gun that she and the detectives ought to handle. Their conversation is cut off when Michael returns, forcing Zhao to tell him how she got her large burn by threatening Mary with a gun, relating to her feeling of being surrounded by fire. Mary captures his attention by promising to give him knowledge about the elders, magic, and even his god, offering to help him find the elder he's looking for. She even accurately describes his childhood horror of nearly being devoured by miasma, and he forces her to share her own. She reveals that her father, Tatay, was beheaded in the mountains by soldiers. He reveals that his parents gouged their own eyes out. He then explains to her how he found scraps from his god's old things, learning that foci needed sacrifices, but not knowing how to power the spell. He even found a page from a book that seemed to hold detailed information about the elder that saved him. Michael agrees to join minds with Mary, and they pray a Catholic prayer together. In the next scene, jumping ahead, Mary's calling her Nanay, telling her in Tagalog about how she held a man as he was dying, how he was an evil man who killed many people, but how she felt power flow into her when he died, marking her as his new god. She calls him insane, but wonders if this was what Nanay and Tatay were so afraid of. Power or destruction? She then asks for forgiveness in Bisaya. The next scene has Mary in a dreamscape, meeting a pale little girl, Clara. Clara tells her to hide, terrified of what might find her, saying the house devoured them. She asks Mary to help her find her brother. Mary agrees, but tells Clara her brother did terrible things. Clara explains he wanted to be an angel, like he was to her. She talks of sacrifices, allowing himself to be corrupted by eating rotten food while keeping her safe and pure for months within the miasma, though in the real world it was only a few days. She had gone back to save her brother after his friend tried to get her out, and then said that because of her, Michael's sacrifice was for nothing. Mary calms her down and has Clara lead her to her brother. In the dream, they pass two boys that Clara indicates, saying one of them died in the house years after her death. She mentions that they had something that made the house hungry again, and that it ate them all up, though one of the boys survived. This boy, she says, who had nice hair, was also named Mikey, the second Mikey, the one from Mikey's tale. She says he sometimes dreams of her, and that she haunts his nightmares. She talks of how the second Mikey's experiences seem to mirror her brother's, the first Mikey. The house burned a second time, and an elder saved him as well. But it wasn't the same elder, though they were both
roiling, with hundreds of voices crying.
When she went to save Mikey, the house is already burning, and she and Mikey are separated when she tries to find an alternate exit. When she returns to where Mikey was, he's gone. The final memory they visit is Mikey speaking to the elder that pulled him out of the fire, whom Mary recognizes as Cornelius. When he asks Mikey if anyone else is in the house, Mikey says no, knowing full well Clara is still in there. It's a momentary decision made out of anger, for Clara wasting her escape. A decision that he regrets the rest of his life. Clara asks Mary to let her brother go, so she can save him the way he tried to save her. Be his angel, the way he was for her. Mary refuses, but Clara persists.
He doesn't have to live for you to let him go.
Back in the real world, Mary holds a dying Michael, asking him why he's so desperate for power. He answers. He dreams of Clara, imagines her asking why he was too weak to save her. He always felt the power of his victims fear death, but could never hold on to it. Mary tells him his sister holds no ill will toward him, but the people he killed want something very different. Nearby, Zhao is terrified at what Mary is doing, but Mary makes her fall asleep. Mary tells Michael of the lives and loss of his every victim, and lets him pass away, but not before he repeats biblical words and commends his spirit into Mary's hands, marking her his new God. Somewhere in the ether, other Mary is desperately afraid. Later, Nathan from Clara's tale ends his interview with Donner, with Donner telling him his old friend, the first Mikey, survived the fire, only to become a serial killer, very recently deceased. Donner asks Nathan to identify the body. Nathan then correctly identifies Donner as the second Mikey, who survived the fire in the ruins of the house, the young 14-year-old boy from Mikey's tale, whose best friend Carl died gruesomely in those ruins. The final scene is a call between Donner and the retired detective Dooley, who have been in close contact for years, ever since Dooley handled Donner's case when he was 14. Donner expresses his fear that Mary killed the serial killer Michael with magic, but Dooley tells him to focus on the fact that Michael won't be killing anyone else, and that Zhao and Mary survived. Donner has anxieties surrounding their strange similarities as two Mikeys, his own dogged hunt for answers about the elders, and his own powerlessness, always relying on Mary to make up the difference. Dooley snaps him out of his guilt with kind but grounded advice, which Donner has clearly relied on for decades. They end the call on an affectionate note, with Dooley agreeing to help Donner with some elder evidence. In the Pride episode, Jay and Dooley, we hear a brief history of phone calls between Donner and Dooley, where Donner tells his mentor Dooley about meeting Mary for the first time, as well as developments in his investigation about the elders and foci. Dooley once mentions that his old friend Jay, a journalist he worked with back in the day, with a similar knowledge of the supernatural as Mary, had a book about the horrors they'd been facing, listing people rather than monsters. He has no idea of its whereabouts. He has Jay's notes, but not his book. In the next scene, Donner asks Dooley about Jay, the same journalist who interviewed Elaine O'Donnell, and uncovered answers about Hyde, discovered by Evelyn Y. in her investigations. Dooley is somewhat disturbed by the questioning, since Jay disappeared in the 1980s, but answers anyway. He explains how, back in the 70s when Dooley was an officer, Jay always seemed present in stranger cases, and they would often end up working together, tackling these supernatural cases. It got to the point that other officers would call Dooley when Jay was sniffing around a case, knowing they were close. Jay was clever, charismatic, and very good at obfuscation, his own charm enhanced by his tools, both magical and mundane. One of his tools was a magical pocket watch, which allowed him to perform spells. While Dooley had extensive notes about the supernatural over years of working with Jay, he didn't have nearly as much knowledge as Jay had, and didn't know much about the elders, though it seemed that Jay did. Dooley was also deeply in love with him, but also very closeted, due to recent harsh homophobic practices in Toronto at the time. Jay constantly tried to get him to be more comfortable in his skin, openly pansexual, and frequenting bathhouses and grindhouse theaters on Yonge Strip. But still, Dooley remained afraid. At one point, Dooley and Jay encounter an elder named Clifford Bolden, who had powers relating to books, creating many cursed ones in his library. They triumph over him and some others, but they begin to run into greater threats around the 1980s. Jay starts to get more secretive, seemingly afraid of involving Dooley in more dangerous missions. They still find time to spend together, with Jay clearly wanting Dooley to be open about his feelings, but Dooley remains afraid, even with Jay being more vulnerable with him than anyone else. Dooley ends up meeting Jay's secret fathers, one of whom was a man who grew up in Hyde, Jay's Da, who inspired him to become a journalist with his stories of Hyde's fall. Jay's papa asks Dooley to convince Jay not to be so stupid, but Dooley is unsuccessful. During Jay's papa's funeral, long after Jay's disappearance, Dooley observes a beautiful young yet timeless-looking woman leaving a flower on his grave. He suspects she isn't human, that she might be a friend of Jay's. In the final days leading up to Jay's disappearance, he seems anxious and reveals to Dooley that he's caught the attention of someone powerful, a man called the Right Hand, or the Red Hand. For a long time, Jay had been protected by a magical ribbon that hid him from prying eyes like elders, but now it could no longer hide him from them. Dooley makes Jay promise that they would face whatever was coming together, and Jay seems hopeful. But one night, Jay comes to him, looking troubled but acting normal. Dooley tries to remind him of their promise, but Jay interrupts by saying he waited so long for Dooley to be the one to do it. But now, there was no more time. He leans in to kiss Dooley, but a neighbor opens the next door over, and Dooley pulls away in fear. Jay pulls back, smiling mask in place, and only then does Dooley realize his pocket watch is gone. He wants to keep Jay there, make him explain. But he's too afraid of judging eyes, and when Jay departs, it's the last time Dooley ever sees him. Later, Dooley is delivered Jay's notebook, and he takes his things from Jay's apartment before they're thrown out. He only learns Jay left Elaine his book after her funeral, from photos, though he can never locate it. He cares for Jay's parents until they die, thinking that if he were still alive, he would have definitely come to see them. Dooley curses his own cowardice, his helplessness in dealing with supernatural cases after Jay's disappearance. He promises to give Donner all his information from Jay, as well as his own notes, begging Donner to tell him if he ever figures out what happened to Jay. At the end of this interview, Dooley asks Donner to let the tape keep running, and we hear the faint sound of the benefactor's whistling.
And that was the end of the first half of the Act 3 recap. Like I said, Act 3 is pretty meaty, so we will have to have Part 2. But after that, we will be updating with brand new episodes, soon to be entering the end of Act 3 and the beginning of Act 4. If you'd like to help us continue making Hainai, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/HainaiPod, or donate to us on our Ko-fi, that's ko-fi.com/HainaiPod. The support would mean the world to us, especially right now, because we aren't earning that much on ad revenue, so Patreon and Ko-fi are pretty much the main ways you can support us financially. And if you join our Patreon, you actually get episodes earlier and ad-free, even at the lowest tier, with higher tiers including bonus art, as well as our now monthly bonus episodes. So if you want to listen to more bonus episodes, please do subscribe to us to the Ate tier, that's a $10 tier, on the Hainai Patreon. And as always, thank you. We love you, and hanggang sa muli.
You're listening to Hainai by Motsi Dapul.